Right, well, I'd like to welcome you to this short video I'm going to do. I'm basically going to look at another win of mine before I concentrate on my losses from Hastings. There were far too many painful games at Hastings to dwell on them too much. This game I'm about to show, I got the best game prize for. I think this is probably more out of sympathy for my actual standard of the game. And it was in the last round, but I thought, well, my only chance of winning anything in this tournament is to sack a piece and see what happens. Fortunately, I managed to sack the queen in this game, and it worked out well. But I don't know if it was totally sound. But it was an interesting game, so it's well worth doing a video on. So my opponent was A Green, a very nice Scottish chap, young Scottish player, and we looked at the game afterwards, some of his friends. We couldn't find anything after the game, but obviously when you look at the game with nasty computer like Fritz or something like that, they just spoil all the fun. So let's move on to the game. Well, I started with F4. I thought I'd try something different. I normally start with B4 nowadays, sometimes E4, but, you know, being the last round, why not try something different? I mean, to be fair, before this game, I just wanted to get out of Hastings. I've had enough. I think I lost 30 rating points, had probably the worst tour of my life, so really I was just wanting to blitz my moves out, get in the car, drive back, go to bed, have a sleep, and just try to forget about it. So, hence why I wasn't really that prepared for this game. I thought, well, I'll just wheel out the birds, something like that. And as I expect you know, I've got a DVD coming out, so this is kind of a Dutch kind of thing. Anyway, the game continued rather strangely. I went C4 here, trying to stop black from going D5. Black went D6. D5 could be played now, which is possible pawn sack line. For example, I capture, knight F6, and now E4 is a good move here actually, because if knight takes E4, then queen to A4 check, forking the king and the knight. Maybe black can get some counterplay with C6 here. And for example, after D takes C6, knight to C6, black might be able to put some pressure on E4 and maybe D4, but I don't know if it's enough for a pawn. Probably not enough for a pawn. So anyway, let's go back to the game. So C4, D6. I'm going to go through this game quite quickly, try to keep it nice and sweet, so you can you don't get too bored, as I'm sure lots of you will if I drag it on too much. So via a very funny, strange move order, we actually come to the 4 pawns attack in the King's Indian, which I've had many games in against Mark Headman recently. I decided to play after E6 here, which is the main move. I decided to play quite an interesting idea. Now, most of the time, white plays bishop to E2 in this position, which is very sensible. The idea of this is to, well, just play some normal moves basically. I mean, the game normally continues so like E takes D5, C takes D5, bishop to G4, castles, rook to E8. And I think this is a fairly balanced position. I mean, this is Bologan's suggestion, who's a master of the King's Indian, of the way to play against this 4 pawns attack. So, another interesting idea after E6 is to capture on E6, but I tried pawns E5, which has rarely been played by any top players at all. This is a very good weapon actually. If you get a chance to play this, I recommend it. I'm probably the highest rated player to ever play this, so it's got a good surprise to it. I mean, basically white's plan is to sack a pawn, develop as quickly as possible, and to use his D pawn to launch an attack. For example, the critical position is what happened after D takes, F takes, knight G4. And now white's got to develop as quickly as possible. There's no point playing a move like bishop to F4 here, trying to hold on to the pawn. Bishop to G5 is much more dynamic, a much better idea. And now my opponent played queen to A5. Had this against a player called Willie Hendricks, a strong IM from Holland, and he played queen to B6 against me. I managed to win that game. Another interesting move is F6 here, which doesn't aim to win a pawn, but instead tries to gain some counterplay along the F and E file. But actually, queen A5 is Bologan's suggestion. It looks like a perfectly sensible move. So here I just played bishop to E2, sacrificing the pawn on E5. Like I said, you don't want to worry too much about this pawn. I just wanted to get on with developing. Black played knight takes E5, and now I play knight takes E5. Possibly a better way of continuing is castles and something like knight D7, D6, where my D pawn can actually be very strong. It's probably well worth a pawn here. Anyway, another way of playing. I went knight takes E5, opponent played bishop takes E5, and you can see from the squares on the board, some of my compensation lies in his weak king side. The squares F6, G7, H6 are particularly weak. Maybe my knight on c3 can come round the angles. For example, I might be able to go something like knight e4 to f6 at some point. Also, black's underdeveloped on the king side. For example, these pieces, queen side, sorry, these pieces over here take a while to get in the game. And I also got this strong pawn on d5, which can be a real asset. I mean, look at that. There it goes all the way to the end of the board. Queen, please. Thank you very much. Well, that was my plan anyway. Okay, well, I'll just continue with castling here. Very sensible. My opponent played f6. I don't know if he can play bishop takes c3. Very brave. Obviously, again, he's got some big dark square weaknesses here. But let's move on to the game, get to the critical position where I sack something. So f6, bishop to h6, rook f7, knight to e4, bishop to d4, check. So here, I nearly immediately play king to h1. I've moved my hand up to move the king, and then I thought, oh, hang on a minute. There is another possibility here. I was pretty sure that the other possibility was probably rubbish, but at the time I couldn't see any way to refute it. I thought it was a very interesting move, and I thought, well, I couldn't refrain myself from playing it, basically. I had a feeling it wasn't completely correct, but also for my opponent to refute it, he has to play extremely well. It's not as bad as it looks. So I played queen takes d4. Get rid of that bishop for the queen, for some checks. So yeah, a bit madness, and king to h1 would have left me with very good compensation. I realised at the time, so it's obviously a risky way to play, but I had nothing to lose in hindsight because the tournament had gone horribly wrong anyway. So what happened here? Well, my opponent took the queen. I went knight to f6 check, and now my opponent has two options. He can either go rook takes f6 or king to h8. If you play king to h8, I mean, rook takes f6 leads to an interesting position. Let's just look at one interesting line here. Rook takes f6, knight to d7. And now I have two choices. I take on e6 with some quite good play after something like queen to d8, rook to f1. And it's actually quite hard for black to move his pieces to good squares here. For example, he moves the knight on d7 here. Let's say he moves this knight to c5. Well, maybe I can play something like rook to f6 here. It's possible. Maybe I even have some crazy bishop g4. Probably doesn't work. So yeah, actually maybe black is doing well here. So rook to e6. Okay, the other option was rook to f2. This is a move I was a bit more tempted with. For example, now if black tries to play something like d3, this is kind of a confusing move. Obviously extremely complicated position, so I'm not going to dwell too long. Now bishop to g4 and something like e takes d5, rook to f1. And, well, like I say, a complete mess really, but I thought this position practically is actually quite hard for black to defend. I mean, what does he do here? My rook's coming in, I've got bishop to e6 check. I mean, it's not easy to defend. You have to be a very strong computer to be happy with this as black. But anyway, my opponent after knight to f6 decided not to give up his rook. He went king to h8. So now I played knight to e8. Bishop to g4 is another interesting option, maybe a better option, maybe a good play even. But I went knight to e8. My opponent now played a good move. He went rook to f5. If he goes rook to f1, one line I was looking at, rook takes, knight to d7, and then bishop to g4. And all of a sudden here, I think white is on the verge of winning. Believe it or not, black's very tied up here. My threat, well, what's my threat? My threat's just bishop to g7 check. And then bishop takes e6, checkmate. And what can black play here? Well, I'm not even sure if black can survive this. The position's probably game over. So after knight to e8, rook to f5, a very good move. And now pawn to g4. Now, one of the reasons I went into this queen sack is because I saw a very attractive line here. Okay, first of all, I'll tell you what my opponent played. My opponent played e takes d5. The line I originally looked at was d3. Now the computer originally suggests this move, but it actually leads to a forced win for white here, and it's a very beautiful variation, extremely beautiful variation. I mean, what I actually play here is g takes f5. Now if black takes on e2, I play pawn to f6. And for example, after e takes f1 queen, rook takes f1, there is no way that black can stop bishop to g7 check, and then f7 checkmate. Well, no good way you can stop it. So this is the line I saw, and I thought, well, if I'm going to try to get anything out of this tournament, a brilliancy prize, I've got to try to get something like this on the board. I mean, it's surprising, the whole queen down, but there's nothing that black can do in this position. So obviously d3 is a mistake here. I think the move that maybe refutes this idea is something like queen to d8. For example, then if I take on f5, black just captures backwards e-pawn, a very good move. Now, if I go knight to g7, queen to h4 is actually quite annoying. I was planning to go rook on a to e1 here, and after queen e8, bishop to f3. And now in this position I had two moves. Okay, I'm a rook for a queen down, but I still have some quite nasty ideas when I get my rook to e7. So one idea here was bishop to g5, and I think black must be doing well here, but he still has some defending to do, so probably this is what black should do. Anyway, after g4, my opponent played a mistake. Very easy to play a mistake in such a complicated position, where he took on d5, and now after g takes f5, bishop takes f5, bishop to f3, I think white is just winning here. I'm just threatening bishop to g7 check, and a bishop takes d5. So already game over. Very surprising. Very easy to lose these positions. I mean, even though the computer will say sacrifices are a load of rubbish, in practical chess, these sacrifices are much harder to defend against. I mean, we'd never get the immortal game if we had computers. Everyone would just say that game was rubbish. We'd never get some of the beauty in chess if people just went with what the computer says. So I think from an artistic point of view, sometimes you have to play these dodgy lines if you want to go for something which is a bit against the norm, maybe a bit more beautiful than normal. So anyway, how did the game finish? Well, it finished, he played d takes c4, probably the only move. I went bishop to b7. This is actually better than bishop to g7, which would have won the queen back after king g8. Bishop to d5 check, very amusing move. Queen takes d5, knight to f6 check, king takes, knight takes d5, and black's actually probably better here. Even won the queen back, his pawns are too strong. So after bishop b7, the game finished queen to b5, knight to d6, queen to b6, and after rook to a1, my last piece comes into the game, and black is in trouble. That little beep 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 was actually my phone, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, the game now continued. Knight to d7, bishop takes a8, knight to f6, and after knight takes f5, my opponent resigned in a clearly hopeless position. For example, one line here, I wanted to get something like here, rook takes, and if something like this check, well, king here, and I don't know, let's say d7, rook to e8 check, knight takes, rook to f8 checkmate. So this is kind of thing I have to be careful of, which really made me feel happy. So I suppose that was a slight consolation for me anyway, winning that game. Not a big consolation because I only performed 2200 in this performance, but everyone has a bad tournament. That's what I'm hoping anyway. I will look at my losses in the next couple of days, just to try to figure out what I did wrong. And well, my opponents did play quite well against me, even though they're vastly rated lower than me. But it'll be interesting to look at this as long as I don't cry too much. Okay, thanks for that. Hope you found it interesting. Any comments at all, please leave it on my site.